The air in Porter County during the winter of 1943 wasn't just cold. It was heavy, with the silence of a town holding its breath for sons overseas. But for the Alexander family, the silence had already broken. The telegram from Fort Benning was short, jagged, and final. Claude, their 22-year-old paratrooper, had been found drowned in the red clay of Georgia. When the train pulled into the station, the casket was sealed, a military necessity, they said. The family did what was expected. They wept, they marched behind the flag-draped box, and they lowered Claude into the frozen earth of a quiet cemetery in Kouts, Indiana. They thought the story ended with the casket going into the ground, but they were wrong. Weeks later, a black car pulls up to the sheriff's office in Valparaiso. Inside is a man from the War Department with a file that shouldn't exist. "Sheriff," he says, "we have a problem. The fingerprints we took from the body in Georgia. They don't match Claude Alexander's enlistment records. We might have buried a stranger in Kouts." Now the mystery shifts into a nightmare. If the man in the grave isn't Claude, then where is the boy from Valparaiso? Is he a deserter? Is he a prisoner? Or is he a ghost walking the barracks of Fort Benning? The action moves to the dead of night. Under a flickering lantern, the ground is broken again. Shovels bite into the Indiana frost, the sound echoing off the headstones. The sheriff and a grim-faced military doctor stand over the open pit as the casket is hauled back into the world of the living. It's a race against time and the fog of war. They bring the remains to a dimly lit mortuary in Valparaiso. The tension in the room is suffocating as a local dentist leans over the body, comparing yellow dental charts to the shattered jaw of the victim. Outside, the family waits in the dark, caught between the hope that their son is alive and the horror of who might be in that box. The dentist pulls back, his face pale. "It's him," he whispers. "It's Claude." The mystery deepens. It wasn't the wrong body. It was a massive bureaucratic cover-up of a botched investigation. Claude had been murdered by his own comrades over a robbery, and the military had scrambled the records to hide the shame of it. The war was supposed to happen in the Pacific or across the Atlantic. But for Claude A. Alexander, a 21-year-old paratrooper from Valparaiso, the enemy was wearing the same uniform. On a freezing night in January 1943, near Fort Benning, Georgia, the Brotherhood of the Airborne shattered. The military calls it a line of duty death. When Claude Alexander's body was finally pulled from the Chattahoochee on February 28th, the official stamp was quick and clean. Accidental drowning. Case closed. Move on. There's a war to win. But the military police in Georgia were haunted by what they saw on that riverbank. They saw nothing accidental. Victims don't usually carry the marks of a blunt force struggle. As the snow melted back home in Valparaiso, the heat was turning up in the interrogation rooms of Fort Benning. The break came from the shadows. 3 soldiers, Kissell, Hunt, and Fortney, were hauled in. The facade of the accident crumbled when Albert Kissell started talking. It wasn't a robbery, it was a blood feud over a woman. Kissell's confession was cold and personal. He claimed Claude had been attentive to his wife. In the toxic environment of the barracks, that spark of jealousy became a death warrant. On the night of January 8th, the 3 men cornered the Indianian. They didn't just fight him. They executed a plan to erase him. It started with a fight, a flash of violence between companions. Private Albert W. Kissell struck Claude, knocking him unconscious. Along with 2 others, Herschel Hunt and Raymond Fortney, they loaded Claude's limp body into a vehicle and drove toward a river bridge in Columbus. They thought he was a corpse. They were wrong. When they arrived at the bridge, Claude stirred. He was still alive. What followed wasn't mercy. It was an execution. In a desperate, panicked frenzy to cover their tracks, Kissell and Fortney didn't use guns. They used the earth itself, beating Claude over the head with heavy stones. Hunt finished the assault with a knife, slashing Claude's leg before they heaved him over the railing into the dark, rushing waters of the Chattahoochee River. For 7 weeks, Claude was a ghost. His body wasn't recovered until late February. By the time he was shipped back to the quiet soil of Kouts, Indiana, the truth was as cold as the river he was found in. The mystery now had a face, or rather, 3 faces, and a dark, domestic motive. But the real action was happening behind the scenes. While the Army tried to keep the details of the slaying quiet, the local Porter County officials weren't satisfied with the shifting stories coming out of Georgia. The investigation that followed was a grit-and-teeth pursuit of the truth. It was this persistence that eventually forced the Army to admit the truth, leading to the courtroom drama where a Valparaiso coroner and a local dentist would eventually have to prove, once and for all, that the boy in the river was the victim of a murder most foul. The fate of the 3 paratroopers was as severe as the crime itself, reflecting the military's zero-tolerance policy for such a brutal betrayal during wartime. While the 2-burial case was a mystery in Indiana, it was a swift and hammer-down legal proceeding in Georgia. Based on the official court-martial records, here is exactly what happened to the defendants. Private Albert W. Kissell, as the primary instigator who confessed to the slaying over a dispute involving his wife, Kissell received the harshest penalty. He was sentenced to death by hanging. Under military law at the time, death sentences had to be reviewed by the Judge Advocate General's office and personally by the President, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Kissell was the primary actor who beat Claude with stones before throwing him into the river. Private Raymond Fortney, though he wasn't the husband in the jealousy motive, his participation in the physical beating and the disposal of the body was seen as equally capital. He was also sentenced to death by hanging. His conviction came shortly after Kissell's. The military court determined that his active role in the second, fatal assault near the bridge made him a principal in the murder, not just an accessory. Private Herschel Hunt. Hunt's fate was significantly different from the other 2 because he chose a different path once the military police began their investigation. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Hunt turned government's evidence, meaning he testified against Kissell and Fortney. While the newspaper clipping mentions he participated in the initial assault slashing Claude's leg, his cooperation and testimony provided the specific details, like the use of stones and the bridge location, that ensured the convictions of the other 2. Claude A. Alexander was buried a second time, with full honors, in Graceland Cemetery, where his grave remains today as a testament to his service and the tragedy he endured.